collapsed in the snow, her body shielding three shivering puppies. Headlights fade into the distance. Someone left them there, on purpose. But they don't run. They don't cry. They just wait, as if someone promised to come back. Why was she abandoned, and what dark secret did she survive to protect? The city of Winport had always worn winter like a shroud, quiet, cold, and unforgiving. On that particular morning, the wind screamed through narrow alleys and wrapped its icy fingers around the bones of buildings long overdue for renovation. Snow had fallen overnight, covering everything in a brittle silence. The roads were empty, blanketed in white, and traffic lights blinked through the fog like lonely lighthouses. It was 6:22 a.m., and Edric Hale's van rumbled alone through the industrial district. Edric was a man sculpted by time and grief. In his late 40s, with shoulders that sagged from both the weight of deliveries and memories, he moved through life with the quiet resignation of someone who had stopped expecting surprises. His face was weathered, square jaw, short dark hair streaked with gray, and eyes that had once held light but now clung to habit more than hope. He wore a canvas coat with faded patches, heavy boots, and a wool cap pulled low. He lived alone in a narrow brick house with peeling shutters, and for the past 5 years, he hadn't spoken to anyone longer than necessary. Since the day his son died, the world had never been quite as loud again. He sipped from a dented thermos as he drove, watching his breath fog up the windshield, despite the van's heater wheezing at full power. His route today was eastbound, supplies to a machine shop near the river. Nothing special, just routine. That's what Edric liked about it. Routine asked no questions. Routine didn't hurt. But routine ended the moment he saw it. Under the hazy beam of the streetlight ahead, there was a shape. Something small and crumpled near the edge of the road, almost buried in snow. He eased off the gas, eyes narrowing. A trash bag, maybe? Discarded cardboard? But then it moved. His heart stuttered. As the van rolled slowly to a stop, the headlights caught it fully. A dog. Not just one, there were small bundles tucked close to her side. Puppies. The mother, a German shepherd, lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Her fur, black and tan, matted and soaked, clung to her thin body like a last defense against death. Her head lifted slightly, ears back, eyes wide. She didn't run. She just stared. Edric sat frozen for a long second. Then he muttered under his breath, "Damn it." He checked the rearview mirror. No cars, no people. Only snow and fog. The road was his alone. He pulled the van over, shoved the thermos aside, and stepped out. The cold hit him like a slap. Boots crunching in the snow, he approached slowly, his breath coming in clouds. The mother dog didn't move. Her eyes never left him. "Easy," he said softly, kneeling. "I'm not going to hurt you." She blinked once, long and slow, but didn't flinch. Her body was curled tightly around the pups, shielding them from the worst of the cold. They were barely moving. One of them, a tiny male he guessed, let out a faint whimper. Edric reached out and touched the mother gently on the neck. She trembled. That was enough. He returned to the van, grabbed the spare coat from the back seat, and returned to wrap the puppies inside. The mother let out a weak whine, but made no move to stop him. "You're not going to make it out here," he murmured. "None of you will." It took effort to gather them, 3 pups, each small and soft and far too cold. The mother weighed less than she should. Her ribs pressed through her damp fur like the bones of a broken umbrella. He lifted her carefully and placed her in the passenger seat, then tucked the coat around the puppies and set them in her lap. She curled instinctively around them, her breathing shallow, but her eyes never left Edric's. By the time he was back behind the wheel, his hands were shaking. But not just from the cold. An hour later, he pulled into the narrow driveway of his home. His was a single-story red brick house wedged between 2 apartment buildings on Weller Street. The front yard was no more than a strip of ice and withered grass. The mailbox leaned left, and one of the porch railings had collapsed 2 winters ago. He hadn't bothered fixing it. The living room was small but warm, heated by an old gas radiator that hissed like a tired snake. Edric laid a thick blanket near the heater and set the mother dog down gently, letting her settle with the pups still bundled against her chest. She let out a soft exhale, almost relief, and laid her head on her paws. The room was silent. For a long time, Edric simply sat in the worn recliner, watching the small living mound beside the radiator. He didn't know what he was doing, but he also knew he couldn't have left them there. Not again. Not like that. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Edric flinched, then stood slowly. When he opened it, a woman stood on his porch, arms crossed and mouth already halfway open to scold him. "Edric Hale, what in the Lord's name?" She stopped short. "Is that a dog?" Maureen Bellamy, 62, was Edric's next-door neighbor and one of the few people in Winport who still left homemade soup at his door once in a while. Tall and thin, she had sharp cheekbones, shoulder-length silver hair usually tied back, and piercing gray eyes that could freeze or thaw depending on her mood. Her voice was brisk, shaped by a life in hospitals. Maureen had been a nurse for over 30 years before retiring after her husband's stroke and death. That loss had made her guarded, sometimes sharp-tongued, but her kindness always leaked through. "I found her in the snow," Edric said, stepping aside. "3 puppies, too." Maureen entered slowly, glancing at the scene with professional concern. She dropped to one knee near the blanket, examining the dogs with practiced care. She touched the pups gently. Her expression softened. "They're ice cold. You got anything to feed her?" "No." "I'll bring something." She paused. Her hand brushed the edge of a small cloth bundled around one of the pups. She picked it up, frowning. There, stitched faintly in blue thread, were 2 initials, E. Grunwald. She glanced at Edric. "You don't think—" "I don't know," he said. But he did know one thing. This story was just beginning. The living room was cloaked in a hush that Edric hadn't known in years. Not the lonely kind he was used to, but a quiet made of breath and warmth. The gas radiator hissed gently in the corner, casting dry heat across the old hardwood floors. Freya lay curled on the blanket near the heater, her pups nestled tightly against her belly. 2 of them had begun to squirm and squeak, their tiny limbs stretching as if waking from a dream. But the third, the smallest, remained still, his chest rising and falling too slowly. Edric watched from the recliner, elbows on knees, hands clasped together. He'd named them quietly in his head, though he hadn't said them aloud. The wriggly one with the white patch was Milo. The one who kept nestling under Freya's chin, Luna. The runt, so still, so fragile, he had called Ash, because that's what he looked like, pale, quiet, and fading. Freya hadn't moved much since the morning. She lay with her head resting on her paws, her eyes following Edric's every movement, not fearful, but cautious, protective, and tired. Her ears perked slightly when Edric stood and walked toward the blanket again, but she didn't growl or flinch. He crouched beside her, careful, and reached for Ash. The pup was cold. Too cold. Edric frowned, wrapped him gently in an old flannel shirt, and stood. "You need help, little guy," he muttered. "Let's get you some." Freya lifted her head slightly, a low whine in her throat. Her eyes met his, and for a moment he hesitated. "I'll bring him back," he said softly. "I promise." The veterinary clinic on Taro Street was tucked between a laundromat and a shuttered grocery store. Its faded blue awning fluttered in the breeze, and the bell above the door jingled sharply when Edric entered. The smell inside was a mix of antiseptic, cat litter, and old pine wood. Behind the front desk stood a woman with short auburn curls and reading glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up as he entered, blinking once before her expression shifted to alert concern. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was calm, professional. "Walk in or emergency?" "Emergency," Edric replied, stepping forward. "Puppy, he's freezing. Barely breathing." She nodded quickly and pushed the swinging half door open. "Follow me." Her name tag read Marla, and her movements were precise and practiced. She led him into the back, where the clinic walls turned sterile white, and posters of animal anatomy lined the hallway. As they reached the treatment room, a tall man in a dark green coat turned from a counter, wiping his hands with a cloth. "Dr. Finn," Marla called. Dr. Alaric Finn was in his mid-50s, lean but not frail. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, and his nose was sharp like the rest of his face, carved by decades of early mornings and emergency calls. He had a way of moving slowly but thinking fast. His blue eyes flicked to Edric, then to the bundled flannel in his arms. "Let's see him." Edric unwrapped the shirt carefully and handed over the small pup. Alaric held Ash gently in his gloved hands, turning him slightly, pressing a stethoscope to his ribs. Pulse is weak, breathing shallow. Pup's dehydrated, hasn't eaten in a while. Probably hypothermia setting in. He motioned to Marla, who was already preparing a heating pad and a fluid line. The vet's voice was calm, but Edric felt the gravity behind each word. Is he gonna make it? Alaric didn't answer immediately. He glanced up. He's not gone yet. That was enough. As Marla set the puppy down on the warming pad, Edric explained briefly how he found them. 3 puppies. Mother was with them. Found them under a streetlight near the industrial loop. Snow was piling up. Alaric raised an eyebrow. She stayed with them? Didn't move an inch. The vet's eyes narrowed with something deeper than curiosity. Professional skepticism, maybe. He looked up. She's a German shepherd. Yeah, young, maybe 5, 6 years old, too thin, but smart, watchful. Alaric nodded slowly. German shepherds don't last long on the street, not without people. She didn't come from nowhere. What makes you say that? The vet gestured toward the table. The pups were clean, wrapped in cloth. She's not feral. Looked like someone took care of her, recently. You said she didn't run from you? No, just stared. Alaric exchanged a glance with Marla. That's not normal for a stray. Back at the house, Maureen Bellamy stood in Edric's living room, with her coat still on, and reading glasses hanging from her neck. She'd come over with canned dog food, blankets, and a plastic tub filled with heating pads she'd saved from her nursing days. At 62, she wasn't the type to dote, but her hands had a firm gentleness when she set the bowls beside Freya. Freya's ears twitched, but she didn't move much. Luna and Milo were asleep against her belly. Maureen sighed and sat on the arm of the couch, watching the mother dog carefully. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the flannel cloth Edric had used earlier. There, folded inside, was a faintly crumpled slip of paper, so damp it almost tore when she unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky, childish, but legible. Please protect them. Freya didn't want to go. Maureen's lips parted slightly. She stared at the words, then at the dog lying nearby. That's not the kind of note someone leaves if they just got tired of taking care of her, she whispered. Freya blinked, lifting her head to glance at her. The room fell quiet. Edric returned home just after 9, his boots crunching softly against the frost on the porch. He stepped inside and rubbed his hands together. Freya was still where he had left her, but she perked up the moment she saw him. How's the little one? Maureen asked, standing. Still critical. They've got him on fluids and heat. Vet's name is Finn. Good guy. She nodded, then hesitated. I found something. She handed him the note. He read it once, then again. His throat tightened. Someone tried to save her. Yes. And if you ask me, she didn't run. She was left. He looked down at Freya, the thin line of her ribs, the quiet strength in her stare. Someone had abandoned her, but not before someone else tried to stop it. And suddenly, Edric knew this wasn't just an accident or neglect. Something else was happening, something more deliberate. He looked at Maureen. Can you stay here a bit longer? I want to go back to the spot. Might have missed something. Maureen, always the realist, gave a small nod. You're not the only one with questions. As Edric turned to grab his coat again, Freya let out a quiet whine, just once. He paused and turned back to her. I'll bring him home, he said. And for the first time, she wagged her tail. Just once. The morning after the vet visit was quieter than usual, the kind of hush that settled not just over houses, but into bones. Snow had fallen again overnight, smoothing the city in soft white silence. Inside Edric's house, the radiator hummed steadily, pushing back the winter's chill with dry heat and the occasional pop of metal. Freya was awake now, more alert than the day before. Her posture had changed, less collapsed, more watchful. Though still thin and tired, she raised her head when Edric entered the living room, her dark eyes following his every step. Milo and Luna had grown more active, their soft yips like wind chimes against the quiet. Freya curled her body protectively around them as they squirmed toward her warmth. Edric carried a shallow cardboard box in one hand, salvaged from the garage, lined with a clean towel. It would serve as a temporary bed for the pups until he could find something better. As he carefully placed Luna inside, his fingers brushed against something stiff buried in the folds of the towel. Curious, he fished it out. A small, wrinkled piece of paper, torn at the edge and water-stained. The handwriting was messy and childlike, uneven and frantic, but legible. My dad lied. She didn't belong to them. Please, and keep her safe. Elias. He stared at the note, the cold print burning into his eyes. Elias. The name felt like a whisper in the back of his mind, like something important just out of reach. His gaze drifted to Freya. She was watching him now, not blankly but knowingly, as if she somehow understood that a memory had just surfaced. He walked over slowly, knelt beside her, and laid a gentle hand on her neck. The scar where the collar had once rubbed raw was healing, but still visible beneath the matted fur. Freya, he said aloud, testing the name. Her ears twitched. That's your name, isn't it? The sound of it seemed to ease something in her. She rested her head on her paw, eyes softening. Not asleep, but no longer wary. Edric sat back on his heels. For the first time since he'd found her, he felt like he wasn't just caring for a stray. He was caring for someone's family, someone who had tried to protect her, someone like Elias. The knock at the door came just before noon, firm, deliberate, and out of place in the quiet of Weller Street. Edric wiped his hands on his pants and opened the door to find a man standing on the porch in a dark gray uniform, snow clinging to the brim of his hat. He looked young, barely 30, with sandy brown hair swept neatly to the side, a long navy trench coat that still bore a police badge at the shoulder, and sharp, alert hazel eyes. "Mr. Hale?" the man asked. "Yeah?" "I'm Officer Soren Vance. Mind if I speak with you for a moment?" Edric stepped aside, frowning. "What's this about?" Soren entered the living room with a kind of restless energy, eyes scanning quickly, assessing without judgment. He moved like someone who'd grown up watching others expect little from him. Careful, but driven. A notebook peeked from his coat pocket, and the way his fingers kept brushing it showed he was used to being ignored and ready to prove himself. "I transferred to Winport PD 3 weeks ago," Soren said, "but I've been tracking a case longer than that. Multiple reports of abandoned dogs, same breed, similar condition. Shepherds mostly, always left in the snow, near the edge of industrial areas. Found 2 outside Oak Ridge, another near the bridge off Route 7. All female, all severely malnourished." Edric's eyes narrowed. "You're saying this is connected?" "I think so," Soren said. "The description matches what I've seen so far. And word's gotten around that you brought one home recently." Edric hesitated, then nodded toward the blanket near the heater. Freya lay still, but her eyes tracked the officer. Her body tensed, subtly but noticeably. Soren's face softened when he saw her. "She's in better shape than most of the others. That's thanks to you." "She had puppies with her," Edric added. "One of them's still at the clinic. Almost didn't make it." Soren crouched beside the blanket, careful not to approach too closely. "She's strong," he murmured, almost to himself. Then, straightening, "Did you find anything else with her? Tags? Collar?" Edric thought of the note, then crossed the room and retrieved it from the kitchen counter. He handed it over without a word. Soren unfolded it, brows drawing together as he read. "My dad lied. She didn't belong to them. Please, keep her safe. Elias." Soren exhaled slowly. "This name, Elias. I've seen it before. There was a complaint a few months ago from a kid by that name, filed and withdrawn within 24 hours. Reported that his dog had been taken by force, not given away. The address was redacted when the parents intervened." "Who took the dog?" Edric asked. Soren looked up. "That's where it gets strange. The organization listed as the recipient was a research facility, Novigan K9 Institute. It's supposed to be shut down. Officially, it went dark last year, after whistleblower reports of genetic experimentation, splicing, gene editing for behavioral traits, disease resistance, even scent sensitivity. It was part of a broader investigation, but no charges stuck." Edric's stomach turned. He looked at Freya again. How quiet she was. How she barely barked or made noise. How calm she had been, even in the snow. "Are you saying she came from there?" he asked. "I don't know yet," Soren replied, "but I think it's worth finding out." When Soren left half an hour later, Edric stood at the window for a long time, watching his figure disappear into the snow. He still held the note in one hand, crumpled slightly now. The ink smudged where his fingers had pressed too hard. Behind him, Maureen stepped into the living room, coat unzipped, cheeks flushed from the cold. She'd just returned from walking to the corner store, a bag of canned stew and dog biscuits in hand. She noticed his expression. "What is it?" Edric turned slowly. There's something bigger going on here. Maureen placed the bag down. Bigger than a few dogs? Much bigger. He held up the note. This kid, Elias, he didn't just lose a pet. Someone took her, and they're trying to hide it. She nodded once, her lips thin. So what are you going to do? Edric looked toward Freya, who now lay sleeping, her pups pressed close. For the first time since he'd found them, they looked peaceful, safe, like they belonged. I'm going to find out what happened, he said, and I'm going to make damn sure no one takes her again. It was just after 6 p.m. when the wind picked up again, whistling through the broken gutter outside Edric's living room window. The sky had dimmed to that dull iron gray that only existed in winter, a slow descent into cold without ceremony. Inside the house, the radiator rattled softly, casting warmth that failed to reach the unease stirring in Edric's chest. He'd been watching Freya more closely since Officer Vance's visit. Something had shifted in her behavior, subtle, but undeniable. She had become more alert, her ears twitching at every creak of the floor, her eyes darting toward the door when someone passed outside. And that morning, Edric had woken to the sound of her pacing. He sat up in bed, the blanket twisted around his legs, and saw her standing near the kitchen archway. She was staring at nothing, or maybe something only she could see. A low, soft whine rolled from her throat, almost like a plea. When he stood and approached, she didn't retreat. Instead, she gently nudged the edge of the cabinet with her nose, then sat back down. That's when she made the sound. It wasn't a bark, not a growl. It was a name, or something that sounded like one. E-Li-S-S. It wasn't human speech, of course, but something about the rhythm, the tone, the shape of the sound. It made Edric freeze. He crouched beside her. Elias? Freya lifted her head, eyes wide and wet, as if that word had pulled something old and sacred from the ruins of memory. She whined again, then tucked her head under his arm. That was the moment Edric knew. The boy's name meant something. Deeply. Maureen arrived just after sunset with her usual stubborn energy. She was bundled in a wool coat too big for her, a knitted hat sliding sideways on her head. Her hands were red from the cold, but her eyes were sharp. She placed a Tupperware container of vegetable stew on the counter without asking if Edric had eaten. She knew the answer. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, shrugging off her coat. About the boy. Elias. Edric turned from the sink. What about him? She ran her fingers along the windowsill absently, as if digging through memories. You know the old factory lot down by Haverhill Avenue? The one near the rail tracks? He nodded. The chemical storage site that shut down? Yes. About 3 weeks ago, I was walking home from choir practice. Took the shortcut behind the depot. I saw a boy there, couldn't have been more than 12 or 13. Skinny, pale, bundled in this oversized red hoodie. And there was a dog with him. Big. German Shepherd, I think. Looked lost. Or like they were hiding. Edric stepped forward. Are you sure? Maureen nodded slowly. They didn't see me. I didn't want to scare them. But that dog, it had the same way of moving. Quiet. Heavy. Like it was carrying something it didn't know how to drop. Freya was lying near the radiator again, but at the sound of Maureen's voice, her ears perked. She didn't move, but her tail tapped once against the floor. Just once. She remembers him, Edric said, his voice low. She remembers Elias. Maureen's face softened. Then we're closer than we thought. It was just after dinner, a little past 7:30, when the knock came at the door. It wasn't a neighborly knock, not the light, polite kind Maureen used, or the firm tap of a delivery man. This one was slow, deliberate. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, like the start of something Edric didn't want to finish. He opened the door cautiously. A man stood on the porch. Not young, but not old, mid-40s maybe, with slicked-back hair and a navy wool coat buttoned all the way to his throat. His face was clean-shaven, smooth, but something in his smile felt off. Too perfect, too still. His gloves were leather, black and spotless, even in the snow. "Good evening," the man said. His voice was smooth, almost friendly, but hollow in the middle. "Sorry to bother you. I believe you recently came across a dog. A German Shepherd, female, 3 puppies." Edric stiffened. "Why?" The man's smile didn't falter. "I represent a private breeder. That dog was lost during a transport. Very valuable animal, specialized genetics. We've been trying to track her for days. You can imagine how important she is to our client? Edric didn't move. She's not for sale. Oh, the man chuckled, a rehearsed sound. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to recover lost property. We're prepared to compensate you, of course. He reached into his coat and pulled out a crisp white envelope. $10,000, cash, just for handing her over. Edric stared at the envelope, then at the man. She's not yours. She's not yours either, the man replied. You found her, that's all. Edric stepped back and shut the door without another word. Behind him, Freya had risen from her blanket. Her hackles were up. Her eyes burned. She didn't bark, didn't growl, but she stood between the front door and her puppies with the calm, fierce resolve of a creature who had been hunted before. Edric's chest tightened. They're coming back for you, aren't they? Later that night, the SUV appeared. No knock this time, no voice. Just the low hum of a quiet engine idling under the snow-covered streetlight across from Edric's house. The windows were tinted black. The license plate was too dirty to read clearly. It sat there for 15 minutes, then it drove away. The next night, it came back. No one got out. Edric didn't sleep much after that. He kept the porch light on, his phone on the coffee table. He checked the locks 3 times before bed. Every time he looked outside, he found himself looking for that shape, that still black vehicle, just sitting there like a question that already knew the answer. Freya began to sleep less as well. She watched the door now, always. The moment someone passed by the front window, she sat up. And one night, just before dawn, Edric found her staring out the window, growling under her breath. It was low, guttural, different from any sound she'd made before. He looked out. Nothing. But the hairs on the back of his neck stood up anyway. Something was coming. Something had already begun. The cold returned like a tide that refused to stay gone. It pressed through the cracks in Edric's old house, whispering under doors and curling into corners where even the radiator's tired hum couldn't reach. Outside, snow fell in silence, thick, slow, and endless. Inside, Ash was failing. The runt of the litter had never been strong. Smaller than his siblings, lighter by almost half, Ash had come into the world fragile, and no matter how many blankets Edric wrapped him in, or how close Freya kept him to her warmth, his breath stayed shallow and too slow. That night, he was colder than usual, and Edric knew. He'd seen this look before, the slow retreat of life from something that never asked to be a fighter, but was born one anyway. He sat on the living room floor, legs folded beneath him, Ash nestled in the cradle of his hands, wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts. The pup's tiny body rose and fell like a fading flame. Freya hovered close, nose nudging her son gently, her eyes flicking up to Edric, then back to Ash. She didn't make a sound. Neither did Edric. It was nearing 2 a.m. He hadn't slept, hadn't moved from the floor for over 2 hours. He whispered to Ash now and then. Not words of hope or comfort, but things like, "Don't you dare," or "I'm still here," as if his voice alone might tether the pup to the world. He'd said the same things once to someone else. The memory came uninvited, clear, sharp, and warm in all the wrong ways. 5 years ago, in a hospital room filled with beeping machines and fluorescent lights too white to feel real, Edric had cradled his son the same way. Tyler had been 7. Leukemia, late stage. The doctor said the end would be quiet. It wasn't. Not for Edric. Every breath Tyler took was a war. Every pause between a cliffhanger. In his final hours, the boy hadn't spoken much, but he kept reaching out. For water, for his mother's hand, for Edric's voice. Edric had whispered then, just like now, "I'm still here." He never really stopped saying it. Tyler died just before sunrise. Edric had never truly forgiven the sun for coming up that day. Back in the living room, Ash let out a tiny wheeze, then a silence that stretched too long. Edric leaned closer, pressed 2 fingers to the pup's side, still breathing, but barely. He looked at Freya, who was watching with the patience of a mother who knew more about life and death than he ever would. "I don't want to lose him," Edric murmured. Freya responded with the softest growl, a sound of agreement, not threat, a promise made of breath and instinct. Morning came gray and slow. Snow had buried Edric's truck up to the hubcaps, but he didn't care. He had called the vet just after dawn. Dr. Alaric Finn told him to come immediately. By 8:30, Edric was standing in the clinic again, flannel bundle in his arms, jaw tight with exhaustion. Dr. Finn met him in the side room, his ever-present green coat buttoned to the collar. The vet's face, usually unreadable, softened when he looked at the pup. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Marla, the auburn-haired assistant with the always steady hands, prepped a warming mat and a tiny oxygen hood. They moved like clockwork. This wasn't new to them, but to Edric it was. As Ash was hooked to a slow IV drip and gentle oxygen flow, Finn turned to Edric. "He's not beyond saving," he said, "but it'll be touch and go for a while." Edric nodded, his voice hoarse. "Do what you have to." He stayed for 2 hours, seated beside the incubator, his coat still on, eyes fixed on the steady rise and fall of Ash's ribs. At 10:42, his phone buzzed. It was Maureen. She met him back at the house, bundled in layers again, cheeks red from the walk. In her hand was a folded flyer from a local bulletin board, the kind usually used for bake sales or piano lessons. This one was different. She handed it over without speaking. On it was a printed post. Missing dog, German Shepherd, name Freya. Last seen near South Haverhill area. Owner, Elias Grunwald, age 13. Below that, a contact email and a note. If found, please keep her safe. She didn't want to go. Edric's breath caught. "It's him," Maureen nodded. "I did some digging. My niece works at the pediatric unit over at Winport Medical. I called in a favor. Elias Grunwald is currently there. Fell on the ice outside the old train depot. Broke his arm, mild concussion. He was found alone. No guardian listed at intake." "Alone?" "Yes." She hesitated before continuing. "There was a police report. Brief, sealed. Something about a domestic disturbance. The kids refusing to go home. Said something about monsters in suits and people who took her away." Freya, curled near the radiator again, whined at the sound of Edric's voice. She stood, paced twice, then walked over to the front door and sat, tail down, ears up. "She knows," Maureen said quietly. "I have to see him," Edric replied. "You should. He went that afternoon." The pediatric wing of Winport Medical was painted in pastels that didn't quite hide the sterile bones of the place. Edric hadn't been here since Tyler. The smell, the mix of plastic, alcohol, and synthetic lemon, hit him hard, but he moved forward. A nurse led him to room 213. Elias Grunwald was sitting up in bed, arm in a sling, a book on his lap, but not open. He looked young, 13 maybe, with pale skin, shaggy brown hair, and eyes that looked like they'd cried more in the past week than most people cried in a year. There was something guarded in the way he glanced up, like a wild animal waiting for the next trap to spring. Edric paused at the door. "Elias?" The boy flinched but didn't speak. "I'm Edric. I think I found someone that belongs to you." Elias's eyes widened slightly. "Freya?" Edric nodded. "She's safe. And her pups too. She stayed with them, even when she had nothing left. She didn't give up." The boy's shoulders shook. He didn't cry, not exactly, but he looked down at his lap and said, voice barely audible, "I told them not to take her. I told my dad she wasn't theirs to sell." Edric stepped inside. "You were right." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elias looked up again. "She remembers me?" Edric smiled faintly. "She says your name in her sleep." The boy's eyes filled again, but this time he let the tears fall, and Edric stood quietly beside him, a man who had lost a son, now standing in front of another boy who had lost nearly everything, but not quite everything. The sky over Winport was a dull sheet of silver, cold and unmoving. By late afternoon, snow had turned to sleet, tapping gently against the windshield of Edric's truck as he sat in the hospital parking lot, hands still gripping the steering wheel long after the engine had gone quiet. The warmth from the dashboard vents did little to ease the heaviness in his chest. He had never liked hospitals, the way the walls swallowed sound, the faint chemical tang in the air, the way people moved through them, hurried but hollow, as though everyone was walking beside something invisible and unbearably heavy. And today, those old feelings clawed their way back. Room 213 was at the end of the pediatric ward, A nurse with graying curls and tired eyes directed him with a nod, recognizing him from earlier. The hallway smelled faintly of latex and hand sanitizer. Outside the room, Edric paused, took a breath, and knocked gently before pushing the door open. Elias Grunwald looked even smaller than he had imagined. Barely 13, the boy was all elbows and collarbones, wrapped in a faded blue hospital gown. His brown hair hung in soft, uneven waves over his forehead, and a cast encased his left arm from elbow to wrist. A deep bruise shadowed one cheekbone, but it was his eyes that held Edric's attention. Hazel, wide, and so heavy with loss they looked older than his years. "You came back," Elias said quietly. Edric stepped in, nodding. "Didn't make promises I wouldn't keep." Elias's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close. "How is she? Freya?" "She's alive," Edric said, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "She stayed with her pups through the snow. She didn't move until I picked her up. It's like she knew someone had to find her." The boy looked down at his lap, blinking fast. "I didn't know if she made it. I thought maybe she ran too far. Got hit or froze." "No," Edric said softly. "She fought." A single tear slipped down Elias's cheek, catching the edge of his mouth. "I tried to keep her safe." "Tell me what happened." The boy sat in silence for a moment, shoulders drawn up around him. Then, slowly, like a wound unwrapping itself, he began. "My dad, Dieter, he used to work for a biotech lab, some private thing. They made medicine for animals, I think. At least that's what he told me." Elias's voice was steady but brittle. "But a year ago, he lost his job. They said he took samples without approval. He said he was framed." Edric listened quietly, not interrupting. "After that, everything got bad. He started drinking again. The bills piled up. My mom left a long time ago, and it was just me and him. Then he started talking about how people owed him, how the lab was still running, secretly. He kept saying we'd be rich if he could get in again. Then he got a call." Elias swallowed hard. "They offered money for dogs. Not just any dogs. German shepherds, retrievers, labs, young ones. Pregnant ones were worth more. He wouldn't tell me who they were, just said it was a chance to get out of debt." "And Freya?" Edric asked, his voice low. "She was ours," Elias said fiercely, "since she was a pup. We raised her together, me and my brother Leon. We saved lunch money for months to help pay the adoption fee, but Leon, he died 2 years ago. Freya was the only piece of him I had left." Edric's throat tightened. "She got pregnant a few months ago. I was so excited. I wanted to help raise the puppies, train them. I thought we'd keep them. But when Dad found out, I heard him talking on the phone. He was going to sell her. To them?" The boy's voice cracked. "I tried to run with her. Took her leash, her blanket. We made it as far as the edge of the industrial park before I slipped on the ice. I must have hit my head or passed out. When I woke up, she was gone." "She didn't abandon you," Edric said. "She stayed close. You must have passed out and she went looking for help." Elias's chin trembled. "I thought I failed her." "No," Edric said. "You saved her life." Meanwhile, across town, Officer Soren Vance stood in the back office of the Winport Police Department, eyes fixed on the computer screen as the final pieces of a background check finished loading. The small desk lamp cast a warm glow on his notepad, where the name Dieter Grunwald was scrawled in heavy ink. Soren was lean, wiry, with an angular face and sharp cheekbones. He was a man who paid attention to silence, the kind that lived between stories. That instinct had brought him here, transferred from a bigger city, after his last case ended in a wall of bureaucracy. He'd chosen Winport because it looked quiet, but monsters didn't need noise. The file on Dieter was long and messy, terminated from Novigan for procedural violations, flagged twice for harassment by former employees, and once investigated in connection to a series of unlicensed animal transports. Never charged, never convicted. But something new caught Soren's attention. Last known employer, Argen Biosolutions. Internal project K9R3, Cognitive Adaptation Trials. Note: suspected shell company for Novigan remnants. Soren's pulse quickened. It wasn't just about Freya. There were more dogs, maybe hundreds. And if Dieter was still connected, the boy wasn't just in danger. He was leverage. He picked up his phone and dialed Edric. Back at the hospital, Edric and Elias sat in companionable silence. The sun had dropped behind the clouds, casting long blue shadows across the room. "Where's your dad now?" Edric asked. Elias shook his head. "He came to the ER when they found me, but he left after yelling at the nurses, said I embarrassed him, that I'd ruined his chance. You're not going back there. I don't want to." At that moment, Edric's phone buzzed. He excused himself, stepping into the hallway. Soren's voice came through low and tense. "I've confirmed it. Dieter's tied to a shell company still operating under Novigen's data. This isn't just illegal breeding. They're testing neurogenetic manipulation on dogs, memory implants, behavioral rewriting. That dog, Freya, was likely part of it." Edric's knuckles whitened around the phone. "And Elias?" "I'm contacting child services now. We'll arrange a safe placement. He's not going back." Edric exhaled. "Good. And Edric?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for not looking the other way." Edric hung up and stepped back into the room. "Looks like you'll be staying with your aunt for a while," he said. Elias blinked. "Aunt Miriam? She's been asking about you since the accident." The boy let out a slow breath, shoulders sagging in relief. "I didn't think I had anyone left." "You do now," Edric said, "and one of them's waiting to see you." The snow had turned to slush, melting into the gutters of Winport's back streets as the temperature rose just enough to tease spring. The town looked damp and tired, as though winter had overstayed its welcome. But something in the air had changed. Tension, movement, the buzz of a storm about to break. Inside a dark blue unmarked sedan parked a block from an abandoned freight warehouse, Officer Soren Vance sat behind the wheel, his eyes fixed on the rusted chain-link fence surrounding the lot. His jacket was zipped up to his throat, his short sandy hair still damp from the sleet outside. He chewed the inside of his cheek, a habit left over from the years he spent investigating dead ends in cities too big to care. Beside him, Edric Hale sat in silence, wearing the same worn flannel coat he always did, the same boots caked with road salt and memory. His jaw was clenched tight, his fists resting on his thighs. He hadn't said a word in 10 minutes. "You sure you're ready for this?" Soren asked, without looking over. Edric didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on the warehouse's loading bay. "No," he said, "but she deserves someone who is." Behind them, a second vehicle pulled in, an unmarked police van with officers from the Winport Special Investigations Unit. 2 men in Kevlar emerged from the back, heads bowed against the drizzle, their breath steaming. Leading them was Lieutenant Margaret Crane, a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair tied into a no-nonsense bun, and the kind of eyes that didn't blink unless necessary. She nodded at Soren, barely glancing at Edric, then gestured toward the building. "Let's move," she said. The team advanced with practiced caution, boots sloshing through icy puddles, guns drawn low. Soren moved with them, and Edric followed, heart thudding like a war drum. He wasn't law enforcement, wasn't trained for raids or takedowns, but when it came to Freya, he didn't need training. They reached the warehouse's side door, now warped from age and rusted at the hinges. One officer raised a pry bar and wedged it into the lock. With a sharp crack, the door swung open, revealing a cavern of shadows and silence. The inside smelled of bleach and decay. Pallets were stacked haphazardly along the far wall, some covered in tarp, others left bare. Dog crates, most of them empty. A table in the center held syringes, clipped files, and stacks of labels bearing codes like K9R03 and G4 unfit. "Clear," one officer called. Soren stepped inside, flashlight cutting through the dimness. Edric followed, every hair on his body standing upright. And then he saw it. A small cage pushed into the corner, half covered in a blanket. Inside, trembling, was a yellow Labrador, ribs showing through her fur, eyes too big for her face. She didn't bark. She just stared. "Dear God," Edric whispered. Crane barked orders to secure evidence. Photographs were taken. Boxes were cataloged. But it was Soren who found the smoking gun. A locked file cabinet with a list of dates, names, and payment receipts tied to the shell company registered under Argon Biosolutions. All of it traced back to Novigen. "They didn't just sell the dogs," Soren muttered, holding the papers in a gloved hand. "They experimented. Failed litters were discarded, tagged, and dumped." Edric swallowed hard, jaw shaking with anger. "They treated them like trash." Soren nodded. "Not anymore." Outside, as police vehicles sealed off the area and officers moved crates of evidence, Edric stood beside the van where the Labrador now rested, wrapped in a towel and gently sedated. Her name was stitched into the corner of a dirty blanket, Maisie. "I'm not going to let this happen again," he whispered, watching the lights from the squad cars dance against the wet concrete. Later that afternoon, back at the vet clinic, Dr. Alaric Finn stood in his lab coat, glasses perched low on his nose, as he reviewed test results with a quiet furrow in his brow. "Ash has a genetic marker," he explained. "It's not natural, likely introduced through viral vector experimentation, but the strain is dormant now, harmless as far as I can tell. No signs of aggression, no neural instability." Edric sat in the waiting room, Freya lying at his feet, her head on her paws, her ears twitching whenever someone opened a door. She looked better, sleek again, though still lean. Her eyes, however, carried more weight. She had seen something in that warehouse, or remembered something. He would never know which. "So, he'll live?" Edric asked, voice steady. Finn nodded. "He'll be smaller than the others, maybe always a little slower, but he'll live." Freya let out a soft chuff, as if in approval. Across the room, Maureen Bellamy stood by the front desk, her silver hair tucked neatly beneath a thick winter hat. She was filling out forms with the same deliberate precision she used to bandage wounds in her nursing days. At 62, she had no children of her own, but the fire in her when she looked at those puppies spoke volumes. "Got everything squared away?" Edric asked, as she approached. Maureen smiled thinly, adjusting her scarf. "Soren pulled some strings. Said we can co-sign the adoption until the case is closed. I'll take 2. You take Freya and Ash." Edric glanced down at the German shepherd at his side. "You okay with that?" he asked. Freya raised her head, nudged his leg gently, and laid back down. "I'll take that as a yes." By dusk, they were driving again. Edric's truck rolled slowly into the hospital parking lot. The snow had finally stopped, leaving behind a crisp blanket of white over the sidewalks. Elias had been moved to a private room since his father's disappearance, and word was Child Services had already begun the transfer paperwork. Edric parked, then opened the passenger door. Freya stood, hesitant at first. She sniffed the wind, then hopped down carefully, her steps cautious but sure. Inside the hospital, nurses turned to watch as a tall, grizzled man walked down the hallway beside a German shepherd with eyes too wise for her species. At room 212, Edric knocked softly, then opened the door. Elias was sitting up in bed, a book in his lap and a bandage now replaced his sling. When he saw her, the book slid from his fingers. "Freya!" Freya paused in the doorway. Then she ran. Elias held out his good arm just in time to catch her, her body folding into his side like a puzzle piece that had always belonged there. She whined, licked his cheek, nuzzled into his chest. The boy cried. No hiding it this time. Edric stepped back, letting the moment belong to them. It was quiet for a long while, broken only by the sound of Freya's tail thumping against the blanket. When Elias looked up again, he was smiling through tears. "You found her!" "No," Edric said. "She found her way back. I just helped open the door." The last snow of the season came gently, more whisper than storm. It blanketed the streets of Windport in a soft hush, clinging to window panes and tree branches like the town itself was exhaling. Spring was near, not in temperature, but in the way the light touched the earth, less bitter, more patient. Edric Hale stood at the kitchen window, coffee steaming in his hand, watching as the backyard slowly disappeared beneath the fresh layer of white. His house no longer felt hollow. Where silence once stretched across the floorboards like an old ghost, there was now movement, paws skittering, bowls clinking, the occasional thud of a tail against the wall. Freya was no longer a shadow curled by the radiator. She roamed the house freely now, her coat shiny again, her stride confident. Motherhood hadn't dulled her. If anything, it had refined her into something even stronger. Her gaze still carried the weight of what she'd seen, but her tail wagged more often, her eyes softened when she looked at Edric, and when she looked at her pups. Ash, the smallest of the litter, was recovering better than anyone expected. Still smaller than Luna and Milo, but feistier now, chasing their tails in uneven circles, climbing everything he could reach with awkward determination. He had a tiny notch in one ear, likely from frostbite, but Edric never tried to hide it. It made him easy to spot. It made him Ash. Edric had converted the spare room, the one that used to hold old tools and unopened boxes, into a makeshift dog haven. It had cushions in every corner, toys scattered across the rug, and a sunlit spot where Freya liked to nap. Every morning began with barking and the patter of paws. Every evening ended with fur on the couch and a heart that felt just a little less broken. Maureen Bellamy had become a fixture in Edric's life, in the same way snow settled, gradually. Then, all at once, she dropped by every other day, bringing soup, baked bread, or the occasional book with a bookmark already tucked at her favorite chapters. She teased him relentlessly. "Never thought I'd live to see Edric Hale turned into a full-time dog dad," she said one afternoon, arms crossed as she watched Ash attempt to climb a footstool with the grace of a drunken squirrel. "Should I start a club in your honor?" Edric smirked, sipping from his mug. "Only if there's a vest and a badge. You'd look dashing in a paw-print tie." Freya let out a bark as if in agreement, tail sweeping the floor like a broom. Maureen laughed, and for the first time in years, Edric found himself joining in, without it feeling like a betrayal of the past. Mike Torres, Edric's neighbor 2 doors down, wasn't much for words. A burly man in his early 60s, he wore oil-stained coveralls even on his days off, and always had a toothpick in his mouth and a scowl that was more habit than hostility. He'd been a mechanic all his life, ran a small garage in the neighborhood, and lived alone since his wife passed away 5 years earlier. Mike had never been particularly chatty with Edric, but things changed after the warehouse raid made the local paper. When word got out about the dogs, about Freya, about Elias, neighbors stopped looking through Edric and started nodding when they passed him. Some offered thanks. Others offered silence, but it was a kinder kind of silence. Mike brought over a small wooden sign a week later. He didn't say much, just handed it over with a shrug and a grunt. The sign was carved by hand, smoothed at the edges, and stained a deep walnut brown. The words were burned into the wood in neat lettering. "Home is where paws leave prints." Edric hung it above the door that evening. Elias had been transferred into his Aunt Miriam's care after the investigation into his father closed. The boy was safe now, safe and slowly healing. He and Edric didn't speak often, but that was okay. Some connections didn't need constant watering. They simply existed, like roots beneath frost, waiting for warmth. One day a letter arrived. No return address, but Edric knew the handwriting. It was careful, with a few crossed-out words, as if the writer had taken a long time to get it right. "Mr. Hale, thank you for finishing what I couldn't, for finding her, for not giving up when I did. I think Leon would have liked you. He used to say people who look grumpy on the outside are always soft for animals. You proved him right. Give Ash a hug for me. Tell Freya she doesn't have to protect me anymore. She's home now. Elias." Edric folded the note and tucked it behind the frame on his mantel, right next to a photo of Tyler. That evening, the world went quiet again. Not in the lonely way, in the good way. The fireplace crackled. Milo was chewing on the leg of a pillow he wasn't supposed to. Luna had fallen asleep upside down on the rug. Freya lay by the window, her eyes half closed, ears twitching as sleet tapped against the glass. Ash sat in Edric's lap. He was getting heavier, sturdier, but still leaned into Edric's chest like he was trying to remember what safety felt like. Edric stroked his fur slowly, looking out the window toward the backyard, where the snow had started to sparkle under the streetlight. He glanced toward the mantel. Tyler's photo sat there, his son, all freckles and wild curls, smiling in a moment that time had never dared take away. Edric raised his mug slightly, the edge of a smile playing at his lips. "You were right," he whispered. "Angels don't always have wings." Outside, the snow fell steady. Inside, the warmth grew, and for the first time in years, the house wasn't just full. It was home. Life doesn't always shout when it gives us miracles. Sometimes it whispers, in the shape of a dog lying quietly beneath a streetlight, in a boy who refuses to give up despite the hurt in his heart, in a man who has every reason to walk away but chooses to stop and care. Freya, Ash, Elias, even Edric. They weren't heroes. They were broken souls who happened to cross paths in the cold. But maybe, just maybe, God placed them in each other's lives to remind us of what grace looks like when it's lived, not spoken. Because sometimes, miracles don't come with thunder or wings. They come with 4 paws, tired eyes, and a heart still willing to love. If you've ever been changed by an animal's love, if you've ever found healing in the most unexpected place, Or if you simply believe that hope still lives among us, share this story. Let someone else remember that angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they have paws. Leave a comment below and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. And if you're reading this now, I pray God blesses you with peace, courage, and a small miracle, just enough to carry you or someone you love through the storm. Because sometimes you are the miracle someone else has been waiting for.